Hey guys, it's TWE TV here, brought to you another YouTube video, kind of doing another recap of NAS 100. Now, this is going from Friday, June 30th to July 5th, Wednesday. We had a couple trades, but it was kind of on and off. We had some wins, some losers. I'm going to break down each one, kind of give you guys a walkthrough, kind of explain like what's going through my head. What am I seeing at that given point in time that led me on to believe, a certain confluence values more than another one? Kind of give you guys a full rundown, and hope you guys enjoy. Yeah, so let's go ahead and hop onto the lower time frame. And as you can see, we have a lot of zones here. I know. That's why I kind of labeled them just so we don't get lost. Here we have multiple points. We have a midpoint and an extreme inside of this 4 hour. Now, if you can't see it, I selected these points based off of the transaction on each one. So that kind of helped me figure out where the midpoint and the extreme zones were in terms of being 15-minute POIs to the 4 hour POI. So let's go ahead and hop onto the lower time frame and start breaking everything down. Now, keep in mind, remember, this is a 4 hour POI, and right now we're hitting the midpoint 15 minutes. So let's let it run, and probably should hop into the even lower time frame. But yeah, in this case, we're going to go ahead and mark out the individual demands. Now, I'm looking for them to fail, right? Because that's ideally what I want. So I already have an extreme supply. It was respected. Beautiful. So it's kind of starting order flow. And we also have those demands that they both have, respect, a reaction. That's what we want to see. However, we also want to see them, obviously fail, because that's going to give us a big sign. So yeah, so it just failed. All right. So we have two demands that are obvious to us, reacted and failed. So that's proving what exactly? That's proving that the order flow that we have selected is a big chance that it's going to continue. Right now, with that being said, the market kind of jumped to the downside. That's perfectly okay. And I know you probably don't see it now. You probably wonder why I have that big zone marked out. It's a 15-minute zone. I'll go on the higher time frame in just a second. But in this case here, it's slowly coming back up, right? Because remember, we're hitting our midpoint here, right? This is overall a 4 hour supply. So we can expect some sells, at least at this case, right? Now, this is the first trade at this given point in time. So it taps us in. It was going great at the given point in time. I marked out my break even. At least that's the point where I'm aiming for, right? To, at least for the market to hit so I can start moving my stop loss, basic risk management. Now, here's the thing. I moved my stop loss to break even, and because I did that, it immediately kicks me out on that first round, and then you saw how it wicks again to the upside. That's just to kick out any other, retail traders that possibly hopped in. That's how you need to view it. So that break even, it didn't exactly go the opposite way. It was, it was unfortunate, and then the market opens back up, and I didn't really pay too much attention to this 15-minute demand that honestly, I truly believe that it was going to possibly blow through it, and my biggest thing was, okay, I'm just going to maybe take a partial around it and whatnot, but it forced the market, to go to the upside, to basically, cause a break even, which is not a big deal, because overall, the idea was correct. We were looking for a sell, but maybe we should have had that as our hard TP and maybe a little bit of a wider stop loss, because how I'm also viewing it is we have an imbalance here, right? Resting above a demand, that we could honestly look at as like, okay, maybe this fair value gap imbalance started that 15-minute demand order flow. So that's one of the things that you got to be, obviously narrow down your trades and how are you going to enter in the entry model. That's beautiful. But at the same time, try to figure out what it's doing while you're in the trade to start making a decision or maybe change your bias. So in this case, we have a wick inside bar here, and it's demand, reacts to it, beautiful. Right now we're just creating data, to kind of figure out what's the next move. It taps into this 1 minute, 5 minute demand, forms a reaction there. And then from that reaction is, we got a supply there that, obviously it's a bigger zone. It's a 5-minute supply, to narrow it down for you guys. Now, once it's, slowly making its way, I'm also going to realize okay, it's, had a little 1 minute supply here, and it started to create a little bit of 1 minute order flow here. So with that being said, there's a big chance that, maybe this 1 minute could, be the entry for us. Now, however, as much as I would love to just take an entry immediately off of the 1 minute when it plays into it, I want to see that supply break, because that's a big supply resting over our entire setup. So seeing that it broke here was enough for me to think okay, I would be more comfortable in taking that buy. However, another thing that I did notice is now it's breaking out of that 15-minute, right? That 15-minute midpoint. So as it's breaking out of that 15-minute midpoint, it started to create its own order flow, at least at this given point in time. And you remember, we got that 15-minute extreme that's resting to the upside here. So that's something that we have to look forward to, right? So now we're also looking okay, it swept that 15-minute midpoint, pulls into that 1 minute, right? And ideally, it does create a pretty good entry for us. It blows through that supply, wicks it, right, and reacts to it. And with all that, it's also creating some liquidity to the upside here. And then it immediately taps down into a 1 minute demand. And, well, that's a confirmation entry. That's a really good entry. Ideally, that's what we would have wanted. And in this case, I didn't really catch that one. Unfortunately, I decided to stay away from it just because I wanted to collect more data. And, let's be honest here. Sometimes you could get discouraged from a previous trade, like in my case. It didn't necessarily go against my whole idea, but I should have noticed the 15-minute demand and paid more attention to it. So now this is where, we notice that, okay, that little entry there taps into that 15-minute zone, and now we're having order flow on both sides of the market. Now, with it creating order flow on both sides of the market, we got to pay attention here, because that is a great indication for liquidity, right? That's literally a liquidity phase in a nutshell. When you're seeing constant order flow on both sides of the market, one side has got to give. It's either the buyers or the sellers that are going to win here. Now, I'm seeing this 15-minute order flow here, this supply order flow here, and I'm not really seeing the demand really being, aggressive to the upside. We have lower time frame, 1 minute, order flow on demand. So with that being said, I'm kind of looking at a lot of this demand as, okay, there's liquidity here. Yeah, we got imbalance, fair value gap, whatever you want to call it. And then we got 2 15-minute demands, and now we have a 1 minute demand. So I'm looking at this as okay, this can be a big selling point, but this can also be a great buying point here. That was kind of my whole view on that. And on that 1 minute entry, as you notice, we had a transaction there. It slowly pulls into it, and it took a second. It did, but we immediately go ahead and hop into it. But the sad thing is, because we entered a little bit too early, and it did tap into a zone, but from it tapping into a zone and then pulling back, even though it's respecting the zones, we moved our stop loss to break even. So at this point in time, I have 2 break evens, but like I said, as long as you have the overall idea, you're in the clear. Just now, it just takes, you have to refine your strategy. Maybe in my case, I got to open my stop loss a little bit, So what I'm going to be doing next is now I'm going to be looking at it like, okay, looks like it has a big chance to go in the same direction. I mean, you see that aggression to the upside there. So I'm looking at it like, okay, maybe we have a re-entry point. And since, as you can see, there's a transaction, a midpoint and an extreme that are basically conjoined by the hip there, I decided to go ahead and, okay, let me widen my stop loss to accommodate both of those zones. Now, while doing that is where I see like, okay, I could break even it, and we're staying on the safer side, plays around with our emotions a little bit, then it taps into that 1 minute supply that I was looking for, that midpoint of that 15-minute order flow that we were looking at earlier. Now, with that being said, that's where I was ideally aiming, like, okay, we're riding the market to the upside, right, on a little short buy, to continuation. Now, we have somewhat of a reversal happening because now it's tapping into our 1 minute, right? It has that little supply and demand transaction there. The demand has a reaction, blows through it, taps right back into that supply. I decided to have a wider stop loss just because, it's only so much you can do with such a narrow stop loss. And ideally, I was just, writing it down to a 15-minute demand, that was kind of created from a 15-minute supply in the previous market. I'll kind of hover over it in just a second. But I'm looking at it as like, okay, all of these demands, POIs, whatever you want to call it, that little bit of order flow, I'm seeing it as liquidity. And it slowly makes its way down. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I took partials all along the way. I wish I was a little bit less aggressive on that, because I'm looking back at it, I'm like, man, I could have made a lot more, but at the same time, you can't get greedy like that. Now I have 2 break evens, 1 win. Now here's tapping into that 15-minute POI that we marked out. It swept a lot of liquidity, right? Reacts to that supply, beautiful, blows through it. That's exactly what I want to see. I'm just going to mark out that little bit of midpoint there just because I don't see liquidities forming here. And ideally what happens is that it will go and either blow through it or just tap into it. And in this case, it kind of reacts right to that midpoint, and the midpoint is being used as liquidity. So my main objective was to enter on the extreme. That's the biggest thing. I don't see that much liquidity forming before it taps into that midpoint. So I'm automatically going to assume that the midpoint is going to be part of that whole liquidity phase. Now, our ideal entry point would be the extreme. And now when I was entering that extreme, that's when I go ahead and narrow down where my TP is going to be. I'm going to aim for that 15-minute extreme supply of that 4-hour move that we were kind of going over towards the beginning of the video, right? If that kind of all makes sense for everybody. So yeah, we're just looking for some transactions here. Remember, this is the 15-minute POI of that 4-hour zone. So this is a 15-minute extreme, right? The midpoint was already tapped into. It was swept, right? So at this point, we should be expecting a big push to the downside. That's ideally what we should be aiming for. So with that being said, we should be hopping into a lower time frame, and ideally it already, it's sweeping all of these zones to the left here. So now that I tapped that little 15-minute demand, it's basically creating less pressure for the market to, basically fly to the downside, because you were having less resistance. So we let the market flow. We have a little bit of order flow. I just covered both supplies there. And it was a beautiful entry. Unfortunately, I was only riding it to that 1-minute demand that's hovering below it. And in this case, it was just creating a liquidity phase. And you know, it's basically the same stuff. I'm just going to skip you guys that. But moving back to what I was saying, you know, I look back at it now, I'm like, man, I knew that idea. I knew that, okay, it's going to tap into that extreme. And we were going to expect a big movement to the downside. However, I hopped out as soon as I caught that little 1 to 14, 1 to 15, whichever it ended up being. But I look back at it now, I'm like, man, we could have, you know, made a lot more on this. But that's the thing, you got to critique yourself. And if you guys need any more help or if you got any questions, you could definitely hop on our Discord. And as always, stay profitable.